How are you? Good? My name is Dave. I get to be the pastor in this church, and if this is your first time here, I love that you're here, and I want to share with you, I have permission to share this, a WhatsApp message I got recently. It's on the screen as well, you can read along. Here's what someone said to me. It's not a complaint. This isn't about giving you ideas of, oh, here's how you get complaints on the screen. No, this is a question. Here's what was said. Hi, Pastor Dave. Lately, I've been struggling to discover what God's plan is for my life. I'm quite happy with my career path. I love living in Berlin. I have good friends, and I feel at home at Mosaic. Yet, I can't shake the feeling that something is missing. It's frustrating to say the least. I know that God has a plan for my life, but I'm scared of making the wrong choices or missing out on what I'm meant to do. I've been praying and searching for answers, but I'm just not making much progress. Do you have any advice for me? And I was reading this, it's like, yes, I could take some of that advice. Like, who doesn't? Like, anybody can relate to that message. Is it just me? Like, this is, I think, again and again in our lives, there's seasons, I think, where we're asking this questions like, hey, I know God has a plan for my life, but am I actually in the lane? Like, is this what it is? Or am I missing something? I only have this one life. I don't want to miss anything. And if you can relate to this question, if you're also wondering, what is God's plan for my life? What is my purpose? What is my calling? What's my vocation, maybe even? Like, if that's a question you're asking at the moment, you picked a good Sunday to come to church because we are in part 2 of a series we started last week called When God Asks Questions. And today we're going to look at a story where God asked a question, and I think this story can actually help us find some answers. Maybe even hear the calling, but at least find some answers and have a better grasp or better understanding of what the nature of God's calling is actually like. Are you interested? Okay, so we are in the second book of the Bible, and there we meet a man named Moses. Anybody heard of Moses before? He's quite a legend in the book. He's quite one of the great heroes. So if you're new to the Christian faith, maybe you've heard of Moses before. Other religions refer to him as well. He's quite a big guy. Okay, Moses, let me just give you a bit of his story so you know kind of where we enter the story, what happened so far. Moses was born to a Hebrew family in Egypt. And he and his family and his whole tribe, they were in Egypt as slaves. And Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, he wanted to do some population control and especially kind of control the demographic. And he realized those Hebrews, they are multiplying a bit too fast. And so he had this very cruel order that was executed that all of the Jewish or Hebrew babies would have been murdered. They would just kill all the babies. And so Moses' mother, when he was a baby, her mother instinct kicked in and she protected that child. And she placed him in a basket and was hiding him kind of on the side where the plants are in the Nile River. And that's where baby Moses was found and then later adopted by the daughter of the Pharaoh. And so he was saved. And not only that, he got quite a promotion because then he grew up in the palace like a prince, which I think wasn't too bad. Probably, I'm sure he enjoyed kind of some of the perks that came with that. So he grew up in the household of the Pharaoh and probably got a good education, all of that. And then later on, we read that he saw some kind of injustice and for some of his own people. So he must have identified with them still. And he killed a Egyptian guard. Yeah, killed him, and then realized he's in trouble, so he ran for his life and just ran into the wilderness. And that's where he was hiding, not just for a week or a year, he was hiding there for 40 years. He was a fugitive for 40 years, and he met there a kind of some nomadic tribe, and one of the women in that tribe he started to fancy, and then he married into that tribe, and he became a shepherd in his father-in-law's business there. And though that's what he did. He was a shepherd. He went from being a somebody in the palace to being a shepherd boy, well, man, actually old already, being a shepherd in the wilderness. And that's where we read the story today of Moses and the burning bush. Many of you would have heard of this story before, but let's still read it. I'm not going to read the entire because it's 2 chapters long, but just some few verses out of these 2 chapters. In Exodus chapter 3 and 4, Moses here, he's caring for the sheep. He's by himself. He's near Mount Sinai. That's going to become important later in the story. And here's what's happened. The Lord, verse 2, the Lord appeared to Moses in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. This is amazing, Moses said to himself. Why isn't that bush burning up? I must go have a closer look. When the Lord saw that Moses was coming closer to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush and says, Moses, Moses. That's a voice. The bush is talking to me. Like, how have I been in the sun for too long? But Moses actually, he responds. He stops, he responds, and he says, here I am. Here I am. Verse 9. The Lord told him, the cry of the people of Israel has reached me, and I have seen how harshly the Egyptians abused them. Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people Israel out of Egypt. But Moses protested to God, who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? God answered, I will be with you. And this is your sign that I am the one who has sent you. When you've brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God at this very mountain, at Mount Sinai, which is what happened. But Moses protested again. If I go to the people of Israel and tell them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they will ask me, well, what is his name? Then what should I tell them? God replied to Moses, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel. I am has sent me to you. And then in chapter 4, Moses protested again. What if they won't believe me or listen to me? What if they say the Lord never appeared to you? Then the Lord asked him, and here is that question we're going to look at today, which I think is a strong, a powerful, possibly one of the most important questions in life. God asks, what is in your hand? What is that in your hand, Moses? Moses replied, oh, this is a staff, shepherd's staff. Throw it down on the ground, the Lord told him. So Moses threw down the staff and it turned into a snake. Moses jumped back. Say to your neighbor, good instincts. Good instincts, yeah? Then the Lord told him, reach out and grab it by its tail. I don't know, anybody has ever touched it? I don't think you're supposed to touch them. How do you do it? In South Africa? Yeah? Okay. That's what... Sorry. In East Berlin? What? Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so you're not supposed to do this, but Moses did it anyways. Calm down, okay? The Lord told him, reach out and grab it. So Moses reached out and grabbed it, and it turned back into a shepherd's staff in his hand. And God says, perform this sign in front of the people, and then they will believe that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, really has appeared to you. Okay, quite a story. About 10 years ago, Jenny and I were in Los Angeles, and I had a chance to meet Moses. There's a picture on the screen of me and Moses. He didn't say much, he didn't move much. That was at Madame Tussauds, and this was a wax figure. But he's been in my life, he's been quite a hero, and he is one of the heroes in this book. I think many of you would know at least pieces of his story. His life story is so moving, so powerful. It's been made into several movies. There are songs written about this. In fact, where's the Asna? I think we should have done, this was a missed opportunity, we should have done there can be miracles when you believe. If we ever wanted to do that song, this would have been the Sunday. If you still want to do it at the end, it's time to, you can go in the kitchen and practice. We won't listen in, but yeah. Anyways, it's quite a story. It's quite a known story. And this massive story of the life of Moses, one of the highlights, one of the kind of game changers is what we're reading about in chapter 3 and 4 of the book of Exodus, where God appeared to him in this burning bush, this strange encounter he has, and he calls him to lead the people out of Israel. And if you are wondering today about God's calling on your life, if you are kind of leaning in to hear if he has anything to say to direct you, then I want to encourage you today to write down a few things that we can see, because I think there's lessons we can learn from this story on the nature of God's calling. So you interested? All right, the first thing I think we can learn just about the nature of God's calling is that God's call is often unexpected. It is often unexpected, meaning it finds you when you weren't expecting it. That's what it means. Moses, like I said, he was in the desert for 40 years in the wilderness, and maybe in the beginning he had still some hopes that his story would take a turn, but after 40 years I think he had come to terms that this is my life right now. Like I'm gonna look after these sheep until I die. There's no other exit for me out of this. This is what is my life right now. This is my destiny. This is my purpose, I guess. May not like it, but that's what it is. I feel stuck. Maybe that's what he said. And he also knew kind of his tribes people, the people who were all in Egypt, like they have forgotten about me. Like I'm long lost for them. They probably assumed that I'm dead. Nobody's even thinking about me anymore. God must have forgotten about me. Everybody forgot about me. So I don't think he was expecting anything at this point, after 40 years. And we can see this all over this book, that it wasn't just Moses who was surprised by a burning bush and then got this massive call to lead people out of slavery. All over this book, God finds people and calls them when they're not expecting it. Like Gideon, maybe. You know the story of Gideon? He was hiding in kind of behind some kind of wine press, hiding away, and God comes and he calls him to be the leader of the army. David was also looking after sheep, and then God comes and he anoints him to be the next king of Israel. Okay? Isaiah, maybe you know Isaiah, his story. Isaiah chapter 6, he was in the temple mourning the death of King Uzziah, when God comes and he touches his mouth and he cleanses his mouth, transforms his mouth, so he becomes a prophet to speak to the nation. Mary was preparing her wedding when God comes and calls her to be the mother of Jesus. Peter, James, John, Andrew, they were tending their nets because they were fishermen, and Jesus comes and says, you follow me. Again and again we see this principle that God's call comes when we don't expect it. Maybe you want to write this down. God uses little things to prepare us for big things. God uses little things, ordinary things, mundane things, to prepare us for big things. Or God uses the mundane to pave the way for the miraculous. He uses the mundane to pave the way for the miraculous. There's a few verses that speak about this. They're not on the screen here, but in Luke 16, Jesus says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. You know this verse? In Colossians, Paul says, whatever you are doing, put your whole heart into it, as if you're doing it for the Lord and not for man. Even if it's a little thing, do it as if it's a big thing, And we can see, in other words, that God's call often, as I said, it comes unexpected. God's call finds us when we are doing ordinary things. Let me say it this way. God's call finds us when we are faithful in what he had previously led us to. When we're faithful in what he had previously led us to. My question to you is, if you are waiting to hear from God for kind of some calling, some direction, some marching order, my question is, what is the last thing he had told you to do? Or what is the last place he had called you to? And are you faithful there? Faithfulness opens the door for the next assignment. Write that down. Faithfulness opens the door for your next assignment. Are you faithful in what he has led you to before? And maybe you're saying, I'm not sure if he's ever led me to anything. I'm not sure if I ever heard him say anything to me. If that's what you're saying, then I must say, you haven't spent much time in this book. Okay? The Bible is our burning bush. That's tweetable as well. The Bible is true. The Bible is our burning bush. If you want to hear from God, if you're waiting for directions, if you want to know, is there an adventure for me? Open this book. This book is full of instructions and assignments and adventures and commands and all of that. Was like, if you want to know what God has for your life, what he wants you to do and be, read this book. Okay? But don't keep this book closed and then complain that God never speaks to you. The primary vehicle that God uses to speak to us is through this book. Okay? And Moses, I think the reason why he got a burning bush is because he didn't have a Bible. The Bible wasn't written yet. That's why God kind of went out of the way and kind of, okay, you get a special way for me to speak to you, to get your attention, okay? And then God calls him and he tells him, you're going to lead the people out of Israel. And Moses instinctively pushes back. And that's because of the second thing. God's call is usually intimidating. God's call is usually intimidating. In other words, it scares you to death. When you hear it's like, oh God, you want me to do this? Ooh, that's what happened with Moses. God says, I want you to go to Pharaoh and ask him to set my people free. And Moses says, I think you have the wrong guy. I don't think I can do this. Anybody else ever said this to God? Like, I'm not sure if I can do this. You got the wrong guy. And if you're thinking about it, I think this is actually it's a healthy reaction. Because sometimes we're reading these two chapters and we're giving Moses a bit of a hard time. It's like, why is he so reluctant to be obedient to God? What's wrong with him? You know? But if you think about what God asked him to do, it's good that he was reluctant. It would be weird if he were to say, oh, go to Pharaoh, no problem, leave it with me. I got this. You know, that would be quite arrogant. Because the call is so intimidating. It means, what I'm trying to say is God never calls you to something that you could accomplish apart from him. God never calls you to something that you could accomplish apart from him. It's good to be overwhelmed. It's good to be intimidated. It's good to see kind of your own limitations and become aware of them. You can write this down. God's call cannot be pursued independent from him. God's call cannot be pursued independent from him. Without God, there is not much we can do. Without God, there's not much we can do. With God, there is not much we cannot do. One more time. Without God, there is not much we can do. With God, there is not much we cannot do. But Moses, he had to get his head around this, because I think he was assuming that what God called him to do, that he had to do it by himself. So no wonder he was pushing back. No wonder in chapter 3 and 4, he comes up with all kinds of excuses and kind of objections to this call. We don't have time to look at all of them right now. You can maybe do that with your small group this week. Let me just look at one of them, and that's the one we just read at the beginning of chapter 4. I call this the what if excuse. Maybe you have used this as well, the what if excuse. Moses protested again. What if they won't believe me or listen to me? What if they say the Lord never appeared to you? You know this thing of what if, these thoughts, is it just me? You guys are liars. No? The what if, of course. How many dreams have you buried underneath the weight of that phrase, what if? How many doors did you not walk through even though they were open because of that phrase, what if? How many nights were you staying up with anxiety and worry because what if was in your head? How many mornings did you wake up not because the alarm clock or your phone was waking you, but a what if thought came to your head and suddenly you're wide awake? And not just for Moses, it wasn't just what if, it was what if they. It's a fear of man. What if they reject me? What if they laugh at me? What if they don't believe me? What if they, that just sounds way too real for me. I'm so familiar with this I'm a people pleaser. I'm sure most of you figured this out by now. Like, I want us to like each other. I want you to like, and like the what if they, like that can be just such a shadow side. It's just very honest here, isn't it? And it's because the call of God can be intimidating. Let's just be real about this. The call of God can be intimidating. Let's look now, though, at how God responds to the what if objection. How does God respond to it? And he responds by asking what I believe is this brilliant question. Let's read again in verse 2 here. The Lord asked him, what is that in your hand? A shepherd's staff, Moses replied. How many of you remember the movie Cast Away with Tom Hanks? Anybody? The older people in the room remember It is an old movie, guys. If you know this movie, it is an old movie. But no, anyways, some of you, if you haven't watched it, you should watch it. It's brilliant. There is, in this movie, Tom Hanks is stuck on, he's cast away on an island for, I believe, 4 years. And he's by himself. And because he's like psychology, we need interaction with other people. And so he comes up, I think he tricks himself, but he creates this fictional friend in the form of a volleyball. Remember him? Named Wilson. You are old. Okay. Okay, Wilson. They did a good job with that movie because they actually make you believe that there's an actual character in the film. Like, who played Wilson? Like, nobody. That was just a volleyball. But it became so real to us that we all cried when Wilson got lost at sea. Oh, I gave it away. I spoiled it. He didn't. He survives. They lived happily ever after. They got married. They had... Okay. It's a known secret, isn't it? It's okay. All right, I never... But anyways, this volleyball just becomes like... It's so amazing how you watch this and you think like it's incredible how, I guess when you're lost on a deserted island, how an object that is inanimate can become so real and lifelike. And you're thinking, that would never happen to me, that an object that is so inanimate would become so real and lifelike. And this is my companion for life. And I interact with this thing every day because that's my thing. And right? When the smartphones first were released, that's how old I am. I remember when the smartphones were released because I used to have just an old Nokia, whatever it was that we had. I remember I said to Jenny, when the first iPhone came out, some of our friends, they had an iPhone. And I remember I said to her, I was like, I'm not sure if this will stick. It's probably like the fax machine. It comes and goes. Remember the fax machine? Some of you remember that, the fax. And I said, I'm not sure if my life ever necessitates that I need a smartphone in my life. Boy, was I wrong, right? And the reason why I said this is because I had no idea at the time what this thing actually is capable of. I didn't know what this was capable of. Now, I went on eBay Kleinanzeigen to buy a shepherd's staff, and I thought it was going to be bigger than this. So this is a bit pathetic. Those of you in the live stream, like, all right, just imagine with me. It's just an object lesson. Imagine with me this is a shepherd's staff. Like, I'm wondering if Moses, like, this was his thing. Like, he was out in the middle of nowhere. This was his companion. I wonder if he had a connection to the shepherd's staff, like Tom Hanks had a connection to Wilson. Like, I'm wondering even if Moses gave his shepherd's staff a name. Rod Stewart. Okay, Rod. So this was Rod. Okay, terrible. Let's keep him going. So this was like, I'm wondering if he had a connection with them. But then at the same time, when God said, "Hey, lay down the staff," I think Moses had no idea what this thing is capable of in the hands of God. Just like I had no idea what a smartphone is capable of when I didn't know yet how to use it. Later on, if you know the story, the staff actually takes on quite a key role in almost anything. Whenever there's kind of crazy stuff happening, the staff is involved. Like Moses actually picks up his staff and he goes to Egypt. And God brings about 10 plagues to kind of make Pharaoh rethink his no, because he refused to let his people go. And 10 plagues, and all of them were brought about with the staff. Hey, touch the Nile River, it becomes blood, right? Hey, touch this thing, and then all these frogs kind of appear. Like, it was always the staff who brought about things. Later on, they are at the Red Sea. And how did the waters get parted? Obviously by God, but what did he use? What tool did he use? Like, hey, put the staff in the water. And then one side of the water said to the other side of the water, I'll see you later. Let's part ways for a little bit. We'll see each other again when the Egyptians are here. Boom, yeah? Okay, that's the staff. And then later on, they were in the desert and they were thirsty and they were afraid that they would die of thirst. And they were starting to complain to God. But God says, hey, you're complaining to me, but I'll still provide for you. Isn't God a good God? That he still provides for us and is good to us even when we complain about him and to him. And God says, hey, take the staff and touch this rock. And Moses touched the rock and water kind of came out of that staff. And then a little later, Joshua is fighting the Amalekites, I think they're called. Remember this? And then Moses had to stand on a mountain with his hands in the air and the staff in his hand. And other people are actually helping him to keep his hand in the air, because as soon as the staff is in the air, victories with God's people, and Joshua defeated this army that was fighting against him. Again and again, this staff, kind of God used it, but Moses, when he was standing in front of the burning bush, I don't think he knew what his shepherd's staff was capable of. But then once he put it down and made it available for God to use it, things started to shift, didn't they? Things started to change. The third thing that you can write down is God's call is always vitalizing. Vitalizing, what I mean by that is it brings things to life. Whoever God calls comes alive within the call. Whatever God uses comes alive. Actually, this is the object lesson, but when God said, put the staff down, Moses put the staff down, and what did it say? It became a snake. It became a living creature. Would you want to write this down as well? Whatever we lay down, whatever we surrender to God, He can bring to life. Some of you, that's all you need to hear today. Whatever you surrender to God, He can bring to life. That's not just true for shepherd staffs. That is true for your marriage. If you surrender it to Him, He can bring it back to life. That's true for your career. Some of you maybe recently got laid off and you're wondering what's next. Surrender. God can bring it back to life. That's true for your finances. That's true for your health. That's true for your parenting, for your family. That's true for your dreams, for your future. It's true for your ministry, for your small group. Again and again, this is the story of our church as well. Whatever we surrendered to Him, how many times was this church knocked out almost? And we surrendered and God brought things back to life. Look at us now. It's crazy. Whatever you surrender, whatever you lay down to God, He can bring back to life. Moses' staff, Moses' staff wasn't just a stick so he can guide the sheep around. This staff represented a whole lot more. It represented his influence over sheep. It represented his identity. I'm a shepherd. You see somebody with a shepherd's staff, you know he's a shepherd. It represented his income, or in other words, it represented his status, his salary, and his story. I read this, I thought this was fascinating, that apparently in ancient times, the shepherds, because they didn't have notepads or anything, really all they walked around with was their shepherd staff. And apparently what they did in ancient times is whenever something dramatic happened, something life-changing happened in their lives, they would carve a little reminder in their staff as a reminder for them, but also so they can share the story with others. And so a shepherd's boy would receive a staff, but then over the course of a lifetime, he would, from the bottom up, he would continue to carve in, or maybe mark in there somehow, little symbols to represent, here's when that happens to me. And then obviously it was a storytelling culture. So when maybe different shepherds came together around a fire in the evening, they would look at each other's shepherd staffs and these would be conversation starters. And it's like, hey, what does this symbol represent? I was like, oh, let me tell you about this. This is where I almost fell off a cliff trying to find a lost sheep or whatever. You know, and they would tell each other a story. I actually wonder if Moses' staff, because he grew up in the household of the Pharaoh, I wonder if he had hieroglyphs on his shepherd staff to kind of, here's my life, here's my story, here's when I was a baby and the daughter of the Pharaoh kind of fished me out of the Nile River and I survived. And here's when I was invited along with the Egyptian army and I got to see them in battle. That was quite gory. I kind of loved that a little bit as well. And then here's where I killed a man and I've been a fugitive ever since. No doubt that was on his staff if he had carvings on it. And here's where maybe I met my wife, and here's where this happened. You know, he had all of his, what does that mean, guys? What I'm trying to say to you, when God said to Moses, lay this staff down, it wasn't just put that stick on the ground. God was saying, lay down your life. Lay down your story. Lay down everything about you, all of the successes that you had, but also all of the mistakes that you had. Would you lay it all down? And then let's see together what I can do when I bring this life that you think you're stuck and it's over. What happens if I bring vitality back into it? What if I bring it back to life? That's why I mean, like, God's call is always vitalizing. It can vitalize your life. It can vitalize your story. God is saying, give me your life. It's not over yet. I have so much more in store for you. I have so much, some of you need to hear this. God has so much more in store for you. Your life isn't what it is now for the rest of your life. There's more to your story. God can take your life and even turn things back, bad things to good, and write a happy end out of something that is a mess. If we surrender, if we put our lives down. And that gives me so much hope, because that means, like that moment in Moses' life, that means for us that no matter how badly you screwed up at the beginning of your life, no matter what kind of mistakes you made, no matter what was done to you that you regret and you wish it would never happen, you cannot write yourself out of God's script for your life. Let me say that again. You cannot write yourself out of God's script for your life. He can turn things around. He can write a happy end. The enemy doesn't want you to believe this. The enemy comes and he says, no, you are disqualified for God to ever use you again. Just like maybe Moses thought, I've disqualified myself. I've messed up too much. There's no more grace for me left. And God cannot use me again. Because of what I've did, this big mistake, I killed a man, that's me, I'm over, I'm a murderer, I'm a fugitive, right? Would you write this down? Mistakes don't erase calling. Mistakes don't erase calling. That maybe there's sin in your life and there's maybe stuff you need to confess and get right with God, but it didn't erase your calling in your life, your purpose. That God has more for you. You cannot write yourself out of His script for your life. The other lie that the enemy wants you to believe is not you're disqualified, but it's you're unqualified. You're unqualified. You're nobody. You're forgotten. You're a fugitive. God has forgotten you. There's nothing valuable you bring to the table. You're a poor shepherd. What you bring to the table is not necessary. God has better people to have. Have you heard this? But you believe this maybe? But God said, when the enemy comes and says, God has better people for this. He can't use you because you're too normal. You're not like just average. Like, no, He only uses the hip people or whatever, you know? God has better people, you know? And I find it again and again, I see this in this book as well, that God doesn't care so much about like the quality of what we bring to the table. He just wants us to bring it to the table. And again, God says, just bring me what you have. Moses, what do you have? It's really just a shepherd's staff and my messed up story. God says, great, would you lay it down? I can use that. I can use your life and we're gonna set my people free. Gideon, what do you have? I got nobody. They all ran away. There's about 300 left. And there's thousands on the other side of who are fighting against us. There's only 300 soldiers left. We don't even have weapons. We have trumpets and jars. Like, what are we gonna do? God says, great, bring me what you have. I can use that. David, what do you have? I got nothing. I got a slingshot and 5 stones. And there's a giant standing in front of me. God says, great, bring me what you have. We're gonna slay that giant who's been mocking me. Hey, little kid, what do you have? Oh, it's just my lunchbox. 5 bread and 2 fish. It's not enough to feed all these people. Jesus says, bring it to me. We're gonna make sure nobody's hungry at the end of this. We're gonna feed all these people together. You see what I mean? Again and again, it's not the quality of what you bring. It's just, bring me what you have. In other words, the question isn't what do you bring to the table? The question is, whose table are you bringing it to? Not what do you bring to the table, but whose table are you bringing it to? Not what do you have to offer, but who are you offering it to? That's why I believe it's such a great question for us to think about. What's in your hand? What is this life that you have? And you may think it's not much and it's messed up and there's stuff that I had to mark on there I wish I would never happen. I'm not sure if God can use it. And God says, trust me with this. Would you trust me? Would you allow me to bless it? Would you allow me to bring it back to life? I can use this. I think some of you, that's what God is saying to you right now. The band can already come up. But God, let me just say this. God might be saying this to you as well. That God says, I see your whole life. I see all of it. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And you think because of what happened, your life has become worthless. But God is saying to you today, I can still use that. It is still so unbelievably precious to me and valuable to me. I can use that life that you think is useless. And so that's why I believe God wants to call you. And when His call comes, it might come in a moment where you least expect it. And when it comes in the beginning, it might overwhelm you. It might scare you to death. That's a good thing. Embrace that because it teaches you about your dependency on Him to accomplish that call. But also when it comes, it's gonna demand everything for you to actually lay down and surrender to him. But whatever you surrender to him, he can bring to life, okay? He can, if you put your life at his feet, he can bring your life to life. And you'll feel more alive than you ever felt before. Let me pray for you. Maybe we can stand already, and then we're gonna sing one or two more songs. Two more songs. Are we gonna sing the, no, okay. All right, let's pray together. Guys, Jesus, thank you so much for this story of Moses and the burning bush. I'm glad it was recorded. It is bizarre. There's so many things that we have questions about. It's like, how did this work with a bush that is in flames but isn't burning up? And how was your voice inside the fire? And there's questions about this where we don't know what to do with it. And I'm sure Moses, for the rest of his life, he still had some questions about that moment. But we thank you so much for your call, not just on Moses' lives, but on all of our lives. And your call, there's so much actually in the story where we think, I can relate to that. When your call kind of surprises us and it comes in a moment when we least expect it. Or it comes with such a weight and such a heaviness because it is so big and so overwhelming that it at first scares us to death. And we come with all kinds of excuses and objections that you've picked the wrong people, we can't do this. And what if something goes wrong? But thank you for this key moment in this story where you just said to Moses, what is that in your hand? You may not think it's much, but what is that in your hand? Like, I pray, Lord, that you would help us to think of that question as we go into the rest of this day and into the new week, that you kind of keep poking at our hearts and say, what is it in your hand? What are you going to do with this life that I've been giving you? Are you going to live it just for yourself, or are you going to lay it down so I can use it? So I pray, Jesus, would you help us, Lord, to come daily to moments of true surrender, not just in moments right now where it's maybe, we're in church and we feel like in a surrender type vibe, but even during the week, on Monday morning, Tuesday morning, Thursday nights, that we would learn this lifestyle, this habit of surrender, because we can trust you with our lives and you can bring it to life. Pray this in your name. Amen.